Hi, everyone. This is Mikie Sherrill. I'm here to just talk about the 1 month time period now that Trump has been in office. And we're hearing what Steve Bannon unfortunately called muzzle velocity, just so many different things coming at us with the intended reception to just be shutting everyone down. So what I've been so pleased to see is how we've had people across the country react and take cases to court. And we've had some success. You see horrible things come out, and then you see some success in the courts. And I've been having a lot of questions about what we're doing and how this fits into the greater strategy of litigate, legislate, and mobilize. And so I'm really excited today to be here with Leah Litman. She is a professor of constitutional law at the University of Michigan, and one of the hosts of the legal podcast Strict Scrutiny. And she has really looked into this whole vibe, if you will, of the conservative legal network, the movement. And I really appreciate her taking it as a sort of holistic look at what's going on. So Leah, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much for having me. I think it's so important to do these kinds of events.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I know people love to hear from constitutional law scholars like yourself because, from the outside, everything's coming fast and furious. We see the courts working, but I think so many people, myself included, have some concerns. What if he doesn't follow? What if Trump or Elon Musk doesn't follow a court order? And where do we go from there? But if you will, could you start with a 30,000-foot view of kind of what you're seeing? Can you kind of set the table for us as we start this conversation?
Yeah, so I think the Trump administration has really taken, as you were saying, a Bannon-esque or Steve Miller-esque, flood the zone with bullshit strategy, where they attempt to do everything they want to do, right, as lawless as possible, and in the hope that maybe some of it gets struck down, right? Some of it provokes public outrage, but realistically, we can't actually challenge or litigate all of it, right? We can't adequately inform everyone about everything that is going on. And we can't sustain a level of public outrage directed at every single policy that they are doing. And so that makes it somewhat difficult, right, to sustain sustainable public campaign that is designed to push back on what the administration is doing. As far as substantively what they are doing, obviously they are asserting extremely expansive views of presidential power, basically saying the president gets to fire almost anyone he wants within the executive branch, that the president can decline to spend money that Congress has appropriated, that the president gets to decide what the law is, and thereby basically assume the power that states are supposed to have, that Congress is supposed to have, and the federal courts are supposed to have. And of course, they're leveraging this power to beat up, right, on different groups, be it immigrants, the LGBTQ community, particularly the trans community, and also right to basically demolish and raise the federal government as we know it.
Yeah, and we're hearing, of course, on every level, concerns from the community. So there's been some debate as to whether or not the judicial system is working as intended and halting some of the worst and the most illegal actions. So far, do you see the courts mostly responding appropriately, or are we seeing some of the corrosive impact of the administration's pressure campaign? And I say that because I was speaking to a federal judge just yesterday and hearing about, just for a simple TRO, a temporary restraining order against Trump, judges are getting death threats, assassination threats, threats to their families. So I have to think, I know judges are scared. So what are you seeing from this pressure campaign, I guess?
Yeah, so what I would say is kind of three things. One is, even if the courts are, and I think doing a good job under these circumstances, the system is not working, right? It is not sustainable for a constitutional democracy to have a president engaged in this systemic legal violations, who does not care about what Congress says in federal statutes, who does not care what the Constitution says, who fundamentally is at best agnostic toward the rule of law, right? Courts are never going to be able to fix that system. Now, that being said, I completely agree with you that courts are in this extremely difficult position, right? Given the kind of far right campaign and how easily they are able to mobilize, frankly, wingnuts, right, in their different ecosystems. You know, these judges are risking doxing, death threats, and, you know, possibly physical violence against them when they just do their jobs and enforce the law. And I think what we have seen thus far is federal courts doing their job and just enforcing the law. But another reason why I'm not, you know, so confident that courts are going to be our way out of this is because thus far the cases have been in the lower federal courts, the trial courts, and almost all of the cases have been heard by judges appointed by Joe Biden, right? Some of the cases have been before, right? Presidents appointed by other presidents, or judges appointed by other presidents, including Republican presidents. But the reality is Donald Trump dramatically altered the shape of the federal courts, particularly the Supreme Court. And I don't think we can be confident that those courts that he shaped in such profound ways are going to hold him to the law.
Well, so that's a little bit to that point. That's why I think mobilizing is so important to keep up public pressure. And, you know, I see some of the mobilizing going on. It doesn't feel as if it's where I hope it gets to. In other words, I'm not seeing thousands on the mall protesting certain things. I've been to rallies on the mall for certain events, like the layoff of federal workers and to fight for the 22,000 federal workers in New Jersey, or I've had rallies here, but it it feels as if people are in the mobilization strategy a little bit on their back foot, and I think we need to see a little more power from that. What do you think about what it's going to take beyond the courts to kind of help ensure the law is fully carried out?
Yeah, so I think you're totally right that public mobilization is an essential part of this. I think public mobilization helps the courts, right? If courts are looking around scared about whether, you know, the public and the political process is going to have their backs, having a sustained public campaign of, yes, we believe in the rule of law, like we want, right, presidents to be bound by the law is important, right, for creating conditions in which courts can actually enforce the law. Second is, I think public campaigns have the possibility of invigorating um, people in Congress, as well as other people in states. And both of those, I think, are super essential. So we have already seen some changes in tune from Republican elected officials who have faced their constituents at town halls and other events where constituents are saying, look, these DOJ layoffs are affecting me personally, right? They are affecting my ability to get the services and benefits that I need from the federal government, and they're jeopardizing my job and healthcare. I think it is really important to keep up pressure on federal officials because, again, courts are not going to be able to fill in the shoes of a Congress that is unwilling to stand up to Donald Trump. And so, you know, the American people need to help Congress grow a backbone. But beyond that, I think it is important just to mobilize the public more broadly. I think for people who have already been affected by what DOJ is doing, right? People whose jobs were jeopardized and whose care and benefits were jeopardized when the Trump administration just all of a sudden announced they might freeze all federal funds. We need to hear their stories and elevate their stories so that the next time people go to the ballot box, they understand the risks and what the Trump administration and other people in the party, how they're actually going to govern and the stakes for all of our lives.
I, you know, I think that's so true. Just all of the many ways in which this is going to hurt people. I would say hurt people in New Jersey, raise costs for people in New Jersey, make it harder for people to get ahead. I think it's so important, that mobilization strategy, to bring that to the fore. And, you know, it's funny you said that, because that's exactly what I heard from the judge who I was talking to yesterday. I just need to know that people have my back on this. And I think our judges are getting so many threats from the right wing. They need to see that the majority of the population is not there and does have their back and does believe in the rule of law. So that was just a great point. And then I also, one of the comments I get more than any other is, what if Trump ignores the court order? So, and what do you say to that?
Yeah, that is a possibility. I guess I would say a few things about that. One is, I think focusing on that prospect in some ways undersells the precariousness of the situation we are in now. I think if people are worried about the prospect of this administration defying court orders, they should step back and realize that a president who believes themselves fundamentally above the law, right, like almost a messiah-like figure who is not bound by the law, like the country cannot operate under those conditions. And so if you are wondering, what should I do, right, in the event of a constitutional crisis that is precipitated by a president not following court orders, my advice would be you should be doing that thing now. And those things are getting back to what we were talking about: sustained public outrage, right? Getting in touch with your federal officials, making sure you are selecting state officials who are going to uphold the rule of law and help sustain and power these people organized and people powered, right, campaigns that are designed to enforce the rule of law. But also there are tools, right, that courts and other branches have in the event that the president actually does refuse to comply with court orders. They can try to hold the executive branch officers who aren't following court orders in contempt. They can impose a variety of penalties or fines. And these are circumstances in which I would hope that Congress would also step in and begin to use some of its tools, right, to constrain the president and the executive branch to force them into compliance with court orders.
Right. Well, we have that litigate, legislate, mobilize strategy, as I was talking about. And I do think we've talked a little bit about the mobilize strategy, which is so important and needs to be sustained. I remember in 2018, as we were building a campaign to flip a district, it really took some time for that to make an impact on our Republican member of Congress. I do think it's not sort of a one-off thing, one and done, right? It's a sustained movement that we need to see as we grow people into this movement to stand against what's going on. I think the mobilization piece is really important. We've talked a little bit about the litigation piece, and I want to get back to that in a minute in the state arena. But there is the litigation piece of it. And unfortunately, we came really close. We defeated the horrible bill. Was it just last night? I'm losing track of time. That's going to really take Medicaid away from so many people, including possibly about half of New Jersey school children. But unfortunately, they came back and they were able to get it over the finish line. I was somewhat surprised. I think, again, this mobilization strategy ties into it too. I think sustained pushback against Republican members who voted for this horrible bill is important. But I do think there will be other inflection points as hopefully Republicans see the outrage from members of the community so that they maybe choose to vote differently. And there is a place for Democrats to push in there. But then we have the mobilization strategy. But then I think the states are going to be so important. It's why I'm running for governor in New Jersey, because I think the states have a huge role to play here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd point to two specific examples. One is just from the last 24 hours, which is that the attorneys general of three different states, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oregon, announced that they were basically going on national tour and holding town halls in which they were going to talk about the effect of DOGE on their constituents and the country. Because obviously a lot of Republican officials are unwilling to hear from constituents. They're not going to hold hearings, right, that go into, again, the devastating consequences of these layoffs and of hollowing out the federal government. And so state officials have a really important platform, right, in which to push back against what the president is doing and to help people, right, stay organized and stay mobilized and keep this issue, right, front and center. So that's one thing. Second is, people might have seen the video of the governor Mills basically being threatened by President Trump, where President Trump was, telling her he was going to remove all the federal funds unless she agreed to, the cruel conditions of the executive order as to how to treat trans people. And she basically said, no, like, see you in court, right? Like, I am not going to obey in advance for these illegal directives. And so having state officials who are willing to help people stay organized and then give them something to fight for by being willing to push back, right, and fight against the Trump administration, whether that is in court or in public or elsewhere, is super important. Like, the people can't just do it themselves. It has to come from the people, of course, but we need officials, right, who are actually willing to do something and use the power and platform that they have.
And I think it's also interesting when you think of state power and state courts that the president can't pardon someone from a state court decision. And so when people think about legal jeopardy, I think it's something that states have, as they have that power to say, yes, maybe the courts have decided that in some ways the president is above the law. I disagree, but that's the recent court suggestion in some areas. But in the states, other people are not, and people should realize that they're putting themselves in legal jeopardy if they choose to follow a president who is telling them to do something illegal.
Right. Or you can look at the cases of the January 6th insurrectionists. The president issued a broad pardon of people who participated in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. But the reality is a lot of those people violated state laws in their home states. And that pardon does not mean, state attorneys general and state governors, right, cannot enforce the law against the people who attempted to overthrow the government and took steps to do so in their own states.
Right. And I'm also excited about, because we had one person who wrote that the midterms are our only hope. And that's why I'm really excited about these 2025 elections in both Virginia and the New Jersey governor's race, which I'm running in, because I do think if we build these kind of juggernauts of campaigns, it's a big shot across the bow. And again, to people thinking about their legal jeopardy, realizing that there might be a reckoning at some point, and that, Trump might not, despite possibly what he's attempted to do in the past, might not be in power forever. And they should really be thinking beyond this administration. And hopefully that will bring the administration in some ways into the legal system and following the laws.
No, I think that's completely right. These upcoming elections in 2025 are super important. One, they give us something concrete to focus on, right, that isn't so far removed. Second is, I think wins in these elections would go a long way to debunking the false idea that this was some sort of wave election and swept the Trump administration in on some huge mandate. If people show up and show out in 2025 and basically communicate, we don't like what's happening, right, that's going to burst the bubble, not only of the executive branch, but also the people in Congress who realize, like, they are going to be, right, potentially at risk of losing an election unless they stand up to Donald Trump, which is what the people are saying they want him to do. In addition to absolutely, right, like reminding people, you're not going to be in power forever, right? You should take care to actually follow the law.
Right. And so, as we talk about this, it can be so difficult to talk about all of the things that are happening that are abnormal, that are putting our country in peril, that make us scared for the future, especially, I'm scared for the future of my children. So it's hard to talk about that without generating a sense of hopelessness. And so I really want to thank you, because I think you've walked that line really well. But are there other things that give you hope, or other suggestions you have for how people move forward in this time to prepare for change, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I I like your kind of three-part legislate, litigate, mobilize, because I think those are different things you can focus on. But I think beginning to focus on, in some ways, like starting small, starting state and local, is really important because you can oftentimes make a bigger difference by putting in more time and resources, right, to state races than you can in federal races. And so setting, right, a goal of, I want to focus on these 2025 races and build from there, can, I think, be a manageable and more like digestible thing to tackle first. The second is like find your group of people who you can talk about this with. The group chat is an underrated coping mechanism that can really help sustain us in these difficult times. And sometimes, right, you might just need to scream. Sometimes it might need, might need to take a break and register a note of despair. Other times you might want to make a very gallows humor joke about what is happening, but we can't just be like serious on and on and on like all the time, right? That's just not human. Those are two things. Third is just like take care of yourself. Like you still need to sleep, eat, and exercise. And because as we were saying, like this fight is going to take longer than a week, right? A month. Even with these upcoming elections in 2025, like it's still like some period of time like before those elections. And so we can't just be going, right, all the time until then.
Oh, I'm doing really good at eating. The exercising, not so much. But great advice to find your people. And yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that every member of the Assembly in New Jersey is up for election in 2025 as well. So for everybody who has that desire to do something, New Jersey offers a lot, and you can do it at a very local level and really make a huge impact. And I think, like I said, create a shot across the bow. So how do folks who aren't legal experts, as we're talking about all this, and you're finding your groups and you're mobilizing and you're rallying outside your Republican member of Congress's office, and you're, really tracking these, how do people who aren't legal experts track these cases?
Yeah, so there are a few social media sites as well as podcasts I can recommend. Social media sites, the State Defending Democracy Initiative keeps track of these cases, as does the Lawfare blog. The Civil Rights Clearinghouse at Michigan also keeps track of these places. So if you ever just want to take a peek and look at them, those are websites that are available to you. There are also, several amazing legal commentators who are monitoring these developments. So Professor Steve Vladeck at Georgetown has a Substack, One First Street. Chris Geidner, an independent legal journalist, has a Substack, Law Dork, and they both do a fantastic job, with just like daily emails letting you know what's going on. I co-host, as you noted, a podcast, Strict Scrutiny. It's a weekly podcast, and so every Monday we try to give everyone a digest about what's going on, including in the courts, and we try to make it a little bit funny, so it's not too despair.
Well, that's helpful too. I think we all have to keep up the fight and keep up our spirits. But those are all great ones, and yeah, I think getting the word out about what's going on has been so helpful. Is there anything else you can tell us what we should be watching out for? Any suggestions you have about how we activate, and any final thoughts?
Um, I can't say I have any great concluding advice beyond what we have already kind of gone over, other than to say, today the Washington Post had a story about a woman in Michigan, which is my home state where I live, right, who had voted for Donald Trump and then lost her job as part of the Doge layoffs, and then, was surprised to learn that Donald Trump was, in fact, not going to make IVF free. And I think, dispersing information, right? Like sharing information about stories of real life people who are being affected by what is happening, and making clear, right, the promises that have been reneged on and the lies that were told as part of the campaign is really important, right, to convincing people about how they should approach the upcoming elections, including, the 2025 races, 2026 midterms, and federal races in 2028.
That is such a great point. I think the more we can share stories of actual people that, especially if we know them, I find that to be the most powerful. I think we are in a world where people are very have a very good ear for just talking points or inauthenticity or just I heard from a friend or a lot of skepticism of stories that somebody might see online. But if you know somebody that's been impacted or if you've spoken directly to somebody who's struggling, I think getting those stories out is really, really important. Great advice. This has really been wonderful. I hope we get to do this again. I really appreciate all your thoughts. And I do have to say, it's incredibly difficult um, to keep people in the fight and keep hope alive. But at the same time, kind of convey the seriousness with about what's going on and where we have to be, what we have to be aware of, and where we can't get too lackadaisical about, oh, the courts are going to handle everything. No, we have to. This is a democracy. We all have to be a part of it. So I thought this was wonderful, and I sincerely appreciate it.
Well, thank you for hosting it.
Thanks again. Take care.
Take care.